The park was meant to be a sanctuary of golden leaves and soft autumn wind, but Officer Mason Holt decided to shatter that peace. He spotted an elderly black man sitting quietly on a bench feeding the birds and saw only a target, someone to bully, someone to dominate. He saw the color of the man's skin and assumed he was a vagrant, a criminal, waiting to happen. He slapped the cuffs on with a sneer, ignoring the man's calm warnings. He didn't know that the man he was arresting was Chief Harlan Vale, a retired police chief with decades of distinguished service and a Medal of Valor. He didn't know he was arresting a legend. And he certainly didn't know that by the time the sun set, his career would be in ruins and a battle would begin that would leave one man in a wheelchair and the other standing tall with dignity intact. This is the story of how arrogance met its match in the most unexpected way. The afternoon sun in Oak Haven filtered through the turning leaves of the massive oak trees in Whispering Pines Park, casting a pale, diluted gold over the manicured lawns. It was a gated community's showcase, silent, orderly, and peaceful. For Chief Harlan Vale, it was the closest thing he had found to peace since leaving the chaotic streets of Detroit behind. Harlan was a man who carried his history in his posture. He sat on the wrought iron bench with a straight spine, his shoulders broad and set from decades of wearing a Kevlar vest. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a crisp white button-down shirt. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine that caught the autumn light. To anyone with eyes, he looked like a grandfather enjoying a quiet moment. To anyone with a soul, he looked like a man who had earned his rest. On his lap sat a small paper sack of premium bird seed, a mix of sunflower hearts, millet, and crushed peanuts. He didn't buy the cheap stuff. "There you are," Harlan rumbled, his voice a deep, gravelly bass that seemed to vibrate the air. "Don't fight. There's enough for everyone." He scattered a handful of seeds near the toe of his Oxford shoe. A flurry of wings descended. Sparrows, a bold blue jay, and his favorite, a bright red northern cardinal he had secretly named Red. Harlan watched them, his dark eyes softening. For decades, those eyes had scanned crowds for weapons, for nervous ticks, for the flash of a muzzle. Now he just wanted to watch the birds eat. The peace was shattered, not by a noise, but by a presence. A shadow fell over the bench, blocking the sun. The gravel crunched with a heavy, deliberate sound. Military-style boots. Harlan didn't look up immediately. He finished dusting his hands in a slow, methodical movement. He took a breath, smelling the cheap cologne and the metallic tang of gun oil before he even saw the uniform. "You, get up." The voice was young, reedy, and vibrating with an unearned sense of power. Harlan slowly turned his head. Standing a few feet away was Officer Mason Holt. He was young with a buzz cut that was a week too long and a uniform that strained at the buttons. Not from muscle, but from a softness he tried to hide with a tactical vest overloaded with gear. He carried a taser, a baton, spare magazines, a radio, a tourniquet, and a handgun that looked oversized on his hip. "Afternoon, officer," Harlan said, his voice level. "Can I help you?" "I said get up," Holt barked, stepping closer. The birds scattered in a panic of wings. Harlan watched them go, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I'm resting, son," Harlan said. "Is there a problem?" "Don't call me son," Holt snapped. His hand drifted to his belt, hovering near the taser. "We've had reports. Vagrants, loitering, drug activity in the park." Harlan looked around the empty park. "I see. And I fit the description?" "You fit the profile," Holt said, his eyes scanning Harlan with open disdain. "Expensive coat. Sitting on a bench in the middle of the day, probably stolen. Let's see some ID." Harlan sighed, the sound of a man who had had this conversation far too many times. "Officer, I live 3 streets over, at 405 Elm Street. I'm a retired civil servant. I'm just feeding the birds." "Feeding wildlife is a violation of city ordinance," Holt lied. "And Refusing to identify yourself to a law enforcement officer is an arrestable offense. Stand up now. Harlan calculated the distance. He assessed Holt's stance. The young man's weight was all wrong, too far forward. If Harlan wanted to, he could sweep the officer's leg and have him pinned in seconds. But Harlan wasn't that man anymore, and he knew that a black man fighting a cop in Oak Haven would end up dead, not vindicated. Harlan stood up slowly, unfolding his tall frame. He towered over Holt. "I'm going to reach for my wallet," Harlan said, narrating his movements. "A survival habit. It is in my back right pocket." "Don't you move," Holt yelled, panic flaring in his eyes at Harlan's size. "Hands on your head. Interlock your fingers." "Officer, this is unnecessary." "Do it!" Holt screamed, unholstering the taser and pointing it at Harlan's chest. The red laser dot danced on Harlan's expensive wool coat. Harlan froze. He looked at the laser, then at Holt. "You are making a mistake," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "A very expensive mistake." "Turn around." Holt advanced, shoving Harlan hard against the bench. "You're under arrest for loitering, resisting, and disorderly conduct." Holt grabbed Harlan's wrists, wrenching them behind his back. He slapped the handcuffs on tight, too tight. The metal bit into the bone. "These are too tight," Harlan stated. "Check the spacing. You're supposed to be able to fit a pinky finger between the cuff and the wrist." "Shut up," Holt grunted, shoving Harlan forward. "You don't tell me how to do my job. You're going to the station, Grandpa. Let's see how smart you are in a holding cell." As Holt marched Harlan toward the patrol car, a Dodge Charger with the engine idling, Harlan saw a neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, walking her poodle. She stopped, staring in horror. Harlan gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Don't worry," the nod said. "I've got this." But inside, the fire was kindling. It wasn't the rage of a criminal. It was the cold, hard fury of a master craftsman watching an apprentice burn down the workshop. The ride to the precinct was a display of petty tyranny. Holt drove aggressively, braking hard at stop signs to make Harlan jerk forward in the back seat. The separation screen was scratched and dirty. "You comfortable back there?" Holt taunted, looking in the rearview mirror. "Not so tough now, are you? Bet you thought you could just waltz into Oak Haven and do whatever you want." "I bought my house in Oak Haven," Harlan said calmly. "I paid cash." Holt laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "Yeah, right. Drug money. Or did you rob a bank back in the day?" Harlan didn't answer. He was memorizing Holt's badge number. He was noting the procedural violations in his head. 1. No Miranda rights read. 2. Excessive force with restraints. 3. Lack of probable cause. 4. Unsafe transport. They arrived at the Oak Haven police station, a clean, modern building of brick and glass. It was quiet. This wasn't the chaotic precinct Harlan had once commanded. This was a library with guns. Holt hauled Harlan out of the car, gripping his arm tightly. He paraded him through the back door, chin up, looking for applause. The booking area was staffed by Sergeant Riley Brooks. Harlan knew the type immediately. Decades on the force, tired, cynical, but competent. She was sipping coffee and reading a report. "Look what I caught, Sarge," Holt announced, shoving Harlan toward the counter. "Found him in Whispering Pines, refused ID, resisting, belligerent." Brooks didn't look up at first. "Name?" "Wouldn't give it," Holt said. "John Doe." "My name is Harlan Vale." Harlan's voice filled the room. Sergeant Riley Brooks stopped. Her pen hovered over the paper. That voice, it had a cadence, a command that you didn't hear often in Oak Haven. She looked up. She saw the coat. She saw the dignified face, the graying beard, the eyes that held a storm of intelligence. And then she saw the handcuffs. She squinted. "Vale, Harlan Vale." "That's correct, Sergeant," Harlan said politely. "I believe we met briefly at the Tri-State Law Enforcement Conference in Chicago. You were there with Captain Henderson." The color drained from Sergeant Riley Brooks's face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What?" Holt asked, looking between them, a frown creasing his forehead. "Sarge, he's just a perp. I'm going to throw him in cell 2. "Holt!" Brooks came around the desk, her hands shaking slightly. "Take those cuffs off right now." "What? Why? He's under arrest." "I said take them off!" Brooks roared. The sound echoed off the cinder block walls, startling the dispatcher in the corner. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Holt stepped back, confused. "He's nobody. He was feeding birds." "This is Chief Harlan Vale," Brooks hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Harlan. "Retired Chief of Police of the Detroit 12th Precinct. He is the man who wrote the standard operating procedure for urban de-escalation. He is a legend, you idiot, Holt." Holt froze. He looked at Harlan. The vagrant was gone. In his place stood a titan. Harlan looked at Holt, his expression unreadable. "The keys, officer. My wrists are swelling." Holt fumbled for his keys. He couldn't find the hole. His hands were shaking. The power dynamic had flipped so violently, he was getting whiplash. The cuffs clicked open. Harlan rubbed his wrists, inspecting the red indentations. "Thank you, Sergeant. Now, is Nolan Pierce in?" "Yes. Yes, sir," Brooks stammered. "I'll get him. Nolan and I go way back," Harlan said to the room at large. "I was his training officer years ago." Holt looked like he was going to be sick. Minutes later, Chief Nolan Pierce burst into the booking room. He was a balding man with a soft midsection, a man who had moved to the suburbs to escape the stress of the city. He looked at Harlan, then at Holt, then back at Harlan. "Harlan," Pierce breathed. I have no words." "I have a few," Harlan said dryly. "But let's talk in your office, and bring Officer Holt." Inside the office, the dressing down was legendary. "He profiled me, Nolan," Harlan said, sitting in the leather guest chair, while Holt stood at attention, sweating through his uniform. "He saw a black man in a coat and decided I was a criminal. He didn't ask questions. He didn't investigate. He escalated." "Holt, what the hell were you thinking?" Pierce demanded, slamming his hand on the desk. "He looked suspicious, Chief," Holt mumbled, his defiance wilting but still present. "He was loitering. I was sitting on a bench," Harlan snapped. "That is what benches are for." Harlan stood up and walked over to Holt. He leaned in close. "You wear that badge like a crown," Harlan whispered. "But it's a burden. It's a service. You think you're a wolf's son? You're not. You're just a scared boy with a gun, and that makes you dangerous." "I want him suspended," Harlan told Pierce, "pending a full internal investigation, and I want a written apology." "Done," Pierce said immediately. "Holt, give me your badge and gun. You're on unpaid leave effective immediately." Holt's face twisted in hate. He unclipped his gun belt and slammed it onto the desk. He ripped the badge off his shirt, tearing a button. "This is bull," Holt spat. "You're taking his side because he's a chief. He's just an old man." "Get out," Pierce said. Holt turned to leave, but paused at the door. He looked at Harlan. "You think this is over?" Holt said, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just come into my town and humiliate me?" "It's not your town, Holt," Harlan said. "It's the people's town. Now get out before I add insubordination to your file." Holt left, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. "I'm sorry, Harlan," Pierce said, wiping his brow. He's got problems. I'll handle him." "You better," Harlan warned. "Because if he comes near me again, I won't be calling you. I'll be calling my lawyers, and Nolan. You know how I handle threats." Pierce nodded. He knew. Harlan walked out of the station a free man, but he felt the weight of the encounter. He knew men like Holt. They didn't learn lessons, they nursed grudges, and Harlan was right. The war had just begun. Time passed, the leaves in whispering pines turned from gold to brown. Harlan tried to return to his routine, but the peace was gone. It started with small things. One morning, Harlan woke up to find his garbage cans overturned, trash strewn across his manicured lawn, coffee grounds and eggshells smeared on his driveway. Raccoons, he told himself. But raccoons didn't slash tires. Days later, he came out to his vintage 1968 Mustang, his pride and joy, to find the sidewalls of both rear tires sliced open. It was a precise cut. A knife. Harlan stood in his driveway, the cold wind biting his face. He looked down the street. A dark sedan was parked 2 blocks away. As soon as Harlan looked at it, the engine started, and it pulled away slowly. He recognized the car. It was Holt's personal vehicle, a black Chevy Impala. Harlan called Pierce. "I can't prove it was him, Harlan," Pierce said, sounding tired on the phone. "I questioned him. He has an alibi. His mom says he was home all night." "His mom is lying," Harlan said. "Nolan, he's escalating. You know the pattern. I have him on suspension, Harlan. I can't put a detail on your house for slashed tires. I don't have the manpower." "Fine," Harlan said. "I'll handle my own security." Harlan called a local contractor he trusted. By the end of the week, 405 Elm Street was a fortress. High-definition night vision cameras were installed at every corner, motion sensor floodlights, a reinforced steel core for the front door frame. But Holt wasn't done. He had friends on the force, friends like Officer Victor Lang. Later, Harlan was driving to the grocery store. He was obeying the speed limit, signaling every turn. Blue lights flashed behind him. Harlan pulled over. He kept his hands on the wheel. He started the recording app on his phone and placed it in the cup holder, screen down but microphone up. Officer Victor Lang waddled up to the window. "License and registration? Reason for the stop?" Harlan asked. "Tail lights out," Lang said, smirking. "They were working when I left the driveway minutes ago," Harlan said. "Well, they ain't working now. Step out of the vehicle." Harlan stepped out. Lang walked to the back of the Mustang. He held his heavy Maglite flashlight. Crack! The sound of plastic shattering was unmistakable. "Look at that," Lang said, pointing to the fresh hole in the red plastic. Shards, still falling onto the asphalt. "Busted. That's a safety violation. And is that the smell of alcohol I detect?" Harlan stared at Lang. "I haven't had a drink in years, Lang. And we both know you just broke that light. My dash cam is running, by the way. Rear-facing." Lang's smirk faltered. He glanced at the rear window. A small camera lens blinked red. "Get out of here," Lang muttered, shoving the license back at Harlan. "Consider this a warning." "Warning received," Harlan said. He drove home, his heart pounding. They were trying to frame him. A DUI charge would ruin his reputation, maybe even affect his pension. They were trying to destroy him. That night, Harlan sat in his study looking at the footage from the dash cam. It clearly showed Lang swinging the flashlight. He picked up his phone. He dialed a number in Chicago. "The Cochran firm. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Quinn Vale," Harlan said. "Tell her it's her father, and tell her to bring the war chest." Quinn arrived the next day. She was sharp as a tack and possessed a fury that made grown men tremble. She drove a Porsche Cayenne and wore a suit that screamed billable hours. She set up a command center in Harlan's dining room. "This is systematic harassment," Quinn said, reviewing the footage. Title 42, Section 1983. Deprivation of rights under color of law. We can sue the department, the city, and Holt personally. "I don't just want a lawsuit, Quinn," Harlan said, looking out the window at the darkening street. "I want to stop him. He's going to hurt someone. If not me, then the next black man he sees in the park." "We need to flush him out," Quinn said. "Make a public statement. Force Pierce to fire him." "There's a town hall meeting tomorrow night," Harlan said. "Pierce will be there." "Perfect." Quinn smiled, a cold, predatory smile. Let's go make a scene." But they didn't know that Holt was watching. He was parked down the street using binoculars. He saw Quinn arrive. He saw the files. "Lawyers," Holt spat, sitting in the dark cab of his truck. He took a swig from a flask of whiskey. "They think they can use the law. I am the law." He reached under his seat and pulled out a burner phone. He typed a message to a private group chat titled The Blue Shield. "Target is bringing in legal. Need to accelerate timeline. Who's with me?" 3 dots appeared. Then a reply. "We got your back, brother. Let's teach them a lesson." The storm was coming. And this time it wouldn't be just a broken tail light. The Oak Haven Community Center was a brick-and-mortar testament to the town's wealth. Vaulted ceilings, polished mahogany floors, and a scent of beeswax and old money. On a typical night, the town hall meeting would be a sleepy affair, discussing zoning laws for fence heights or the budget for the annual Tulip Festival. Tonight, however, the air was electric. Word had spread. Chief Harlan Vale sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his hands resting on his knees. Beside him sat Quinn, a shark in a silk blouse, her laptop connected to the projector system. The room was packed. Neighbors who had seen the police cruisers parked outside Harlan's house for weeks whispered behind their hands. Chief Nolan Pierce sat at the long table on the stage, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Beside him was the mayor, a nervous man deeply concerned with property values. "The floor is open for new business," the mayor announced, his voice wavering. Quinn stood up. She didn't walk to the microphone. She marched. "My name is Quinn Vale," she began, her voice projecting clearly without the need for the mic at first. "I am an attorney with the Cochran firm in Chicago, and I am here to represent my father, Chief Harlan Vale, regarding a systemic campaign of harassment by officers of this precinct." A murmur ran through the crowd. "We are aware of the complaint," Pierce said quickly, leaning into his microphone. "As I told your father, Ms. Vale, these are internal personnel matters. We are investigating Officer Holt's conduct." "Investigation is a slow word, Chief," Quinn said, plugging the HDMI cable into her laptop. "Let's speed it up." The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. The audio hissed, then popped. It was the dash cam footage from Harlan's Mustang. The timestamp was clearly visible. The video showed the sunlit street, the blue lights, and then Officer Victor Lang walking to the back of the car. The audience watched in stunned silence as Lang looked around, raised his heavy maglite, and swung. Crack. The sound was amplified by the auditorium speakers. It sounded like a gunshot. "Oops," Lang's voice sneered from the speakers. "Busted." The crowd gasped. Mrs. Ellison, the neighbor with the poodle, covered her mouth. "Oh my heavens," she whispered loudly. Quinn paused the video on Lang's smirking face. "This," Quinn said, pointing at the screen, "is not policing. This is racketeering. This is a gang with badges. My father was stopped for a broken tail light that was broken during the stop by Officer Lang, a known associate of Officer Mason Holt." She clicked a slide. A timeline appeared. Illegal detention of Harlan Vale. Vandalism of Vale residence. Trash. Vandalism of vehicle. Tires slashed. Fraudulent traffic stop and property damage. Traffic stop and... "We have sworn affidavits," Quinn continued, "from 3 neighbors who saw a black Chevy Impala registered to Mason Holt parked on Elm Street during the times of the vandalism." She turned to face Pierce. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector fan. "Chief Pierce," Quinn said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm, "you have a rogue element in your department. A racist, vindictive cell that targets citizens. If Holt and Lang are not terminated effective immediately, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit against this town that will bankrupt Oak Haven. I will sue for the department's budget. I will sue for your pension. I will own this town hall by the time I am done." Pierce was sweating profusely. The mayor looked like he was about to faint. The public pressure was palpable. People were pulling out their phones, live streaming the moment. I have seen enough. Pierce stood up. Officer Lang is hereby terminated, effective immediately. And I am formally upgrading Officer Holt's suspension to termination, pending the final paperwork tomorrow morning. We will purge this corruption. The room erupted in applause. Harlan didn't clap. He just watched Pierce, his eyes narrowing. He knew that cornering a rat didn't make it disappear. It made it bite. Miles away in a dimly lit basement apartment that smelled of stale beer and gun oil, Mason Holt watched the live stream on his phone. His face was a mask of contorted fury. He watched the town he thought he owned turn against him. He watched his chief, the man he was supposed to trust, throw him to the wolves. "Terminated," Holt whispered. He threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. He wasn't a cop anymore. The badge was gone. The pension was gone. His identity, the only thing that made him feel like a man, was stripped away by an old black man and his lawyer daughter. The burner phone on the table buzzed. It was the group chat. The Blue Shield. "Holt, did you see that? We have to move." A pause, then a reply from Lang. "It's over, Mason. Pierce fired me. I'm out. I'm deleting this chat. Don't contact me." One by one, they abandoned him. The brotherhood evaporated the moment the heat got too high. Holt stared at the screen, his breathing jagged. He was alone. "No!" he hissed, standing up. He walked to his closet. He pushed aside the hanging clothes and unlocked a heavy steel safe. Inside lay his personal arsenal, an AR-15 with a holographic sight, a pump-action shotgun, a tactical vest he had bought online. Illegal for civilians, but he had kept it. "I'm not the criminal," he muttered, his eyes wide and unblinking, his mind fracturing under the pressure of his own narcissism. "They are. They invaded my town." He grabbed the rifle. He grabbed the vest. He reached into the back of the safe and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, taking a long, burning pull. "If I'm going down," he said to the empty room, "I'm taking the chief with me." But he didn't mean Pierce. He meant the real chief, the one on Elm Street. The storm hit Oak Haven in the dead of night. It was a violent late autumn squall, stripping the last of the leaves from the trees and lashing the streets with freezing rain. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of the colonial houses at 405 Elm Street. The house was dark, but it wasn't asleep. Chief Harlan Vale sat in the armchair in the living room facing the front door. He wasn't wearing his pajamas. He was wearing dark cargo pants and a black tactical sweater. On the side table next to a cold cup of tea sat his Sig Sauer P226, his service weapon from Detroit. He knew decades of police work gives a man a sixth sense. It's a prickle on the back of the neck, a taste of copper in the mouth. The public humiliation at the town hall wouldn't end it. It would accelerate it. Holt was a narcissist. Harlan had seen the type 100 times. A narcissist doesn't accept defeat. He seeks annihilation. "Dad!" Quinn stood at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a robe. She looked small in the shadows. "Go back to bed, Quinn," Harlan said softly. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "The storm," Harlan lied. "Just checking the windows." "You're expecting him, aren't you?" Quinn descended the stairs, her voice trembling slightly. Harlan didn't answer immediately. He picked up the cig, checked the chamber, brass verified, and set it back down. "Holt has nothing left to lose," Harlan said. "A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing on earth. Go to the safe room in the basement, Quinn. Lock the door. Do not come out until I say my code phrase." "Dad, I'm not leaving you." Harlan's voice was a command, a whip crack that silenced her. "This isn't a debate. This is a tactical situation. If he comes to kill. I need to know you are safe, so I can do what I need to do. Now go." Quinn hesitated, tears stinging her eyes. She saw the shift in her father. The gentle bird watcher was gone. The chief was back. She nodded, turned, and ran softly to the basement door. Harlan waited. The motion sensor light on the driveway flickered on. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the camera feed on Harlan's iPad. But he saw it. A shape moving between the hedges. Not a casual walk. A tactical approach, low crouch, weapon raised. Harlan tapped the screen. One target, heavy weaponry. He brought a rifle, Harlan whispered. Coward. Harlan stood up and moved silently into the hallway. He didn't turn on the lights. He knew every creak of his floorboards. He knew the layout of his home better than Holt knew his own soul. Crash. The glass of the kitchen door at the back of the house shattered. Holt didn't pick the lock. He smashed his way in. He wanted terror. He wanted them to know he was there. Harlan heard the crunch of boots on the kitchen tile. He heard the heavy, wet breathing of a man adrenaline dumping. "Vale!" Holt screamed. The sound was ragged, slurring slightly. He was drunk. "Come out, old man. Time for your medicine." Harlan pressed his back against the wall of the dining room. He held his breath. Holt was moving through the kitchen, sweeping the rifle barrel back and forth, knocking pots and pans off the counters. Clang. Crash. "You think you can take my life?" Holt roared. Blam! He fired a shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. "I am the police. I am the authority." Harlan closed his eyes for a second, centering himself. Target is intoxicated, erratic, heavy firepower. He is sweeping right to left. Harlan moved. He didn't run away. He hunted. He slipped through the living room shadows, circling around to flank the kitchen entrance. Holt kicked open the door to the dining room. Lightning flashed, illuminating him. He looked like a nightmare, drenched to the bone, eyes wild, the AR-15 held awkwardly against his tactical vest. "Where are you?" Holt taunted. "Hiding under the bed?" "Drop the weapon, Mason," Harlan said. His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Holt spun around, firing blindly into the dark living room. Bam, bam, bam. Bullets tore through the drywall, shattering a lamp, shredding the sofa. "Show yourself!" Holt screamed, his magazine clicking empty. He fumbled to reload, his wet hand slipping on the metal. That was the moment Harlan stepped out of the shadows. He didn't shoot. He moved with a terrifying speed for a man of his years. He closed the distance in 3 strides. Holt got the fresh magazine in, but before he could raise the barrel, Harlan was there. Harlan grabbed the barrel of the rifle with his left hand, forcing it up toward the ceiling. With his right hand, he drove the butt of his pistol into Holt's solar plexus. "Ooh!" Holt doubled over, the air rushing out of him. Harlan swept Holt's leg hard. Holt's boots lost traction on the polished floor, and he went down, crashing heavily onto his back. The rifle skittered across the floor. Holt scrambled, reaching for a backup piece. A Glock tucked into his belt. "Don't," Harlan said. Harlan stood over him. The Sig Sauer pointed directly at Holt's face. The laser sight was a steady red dot right between Holt's eyes. "Don't do it, son, it's over." Holt froze. He looked up at the old man. He saw the barrel of the gun, but more terrifying than the gun was the look in Harlan's eyes. It wasn't hate, it was pity. "You!" Holt gasped, wheezing for air. "You ruined me." "You ruined yourself," Harlan said. "Now, roll over, hands behind your back." "Or what?" Holt spat blood between his teeth. "You're going to kill me? Do it!" Holt's hand twitched toward his belt. Bam! Harlan fired. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the shoulder. The bullet tore through Holt's right shoulder, shattering the clavicle and rendering his gun arm useless. Holt screamed, a high, shrill sound that cut through the thunder. He writhed on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "I said," Harlan repeated, his voice calm over the ringing in his ears. "Hands behind your back." Harlan kicked the backup gun away. He pulled a pair of zip ties from his back pocket. He had prepared them and rolled the sobbing, bleeding Holt onto his stomach. He cinched the ties tight. "Quinn!" Harlan called out. Call 911. Tell them we have an intruder down. Tell them to send an ambulance. Harlan knelt beside Holt, who was crying now, the adrenaline gone, replaced by the agony of the gunshot wound. "It hurts," Holt sobbed. "It hurts." Harlan pressed a clean towel from the dining table against the wound, applying pressure. "I know." Harlan's hands were steady as he saved the life of the man who tried to kill him. "Pain is a great teacher, Mason. Try to listen to it." Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm. The cavalry was coming, but the war was over. The chief had held the line. The trial of Mason Holt was not just a legal proceeding. It was a public exorcism for the town of Oak Haven. The county courthouse was besieged by media vans from as far away as New York and Los Angeles. The headline was irresistible: "The Retired Chief versus the Rogue Cop." Inside Courtroom B, the air was stale and tense. Holt sat at the defense table, his arm in a complex sling, his face pale and gaunt. The arrogance that had defined him in the park was gone, replaced by a jittery, hunted look. His lawyer, a court-appointed defender Samuel Reed, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Chief Harlan Vale sat in the front row, behind the prosecutor's table. He wore his dress uniform, the midnight blue of the Detroit Police Department, gold stars on the collar, his Medal of Valor gleaming on his chest. He didn't wear it for vanity. He wore it to remind the jury of what a real police officer looked like. Quinn Vale had been granted permission to assist the district attorney as a special consultant. She was the architect of Holt's destruction. "Your Honor," Quinn said, pacing before the jury box during cross-examination. "The defense claims that Mr. Holt acted in self-defense, that he entered the home of Harlan Vale believing he was serving a warrant. But let's look at the facts." She turned to Holt, who was sweating on the witness stand. "Mr. Holt," Quinn said, her voice sharp, "did you have a warrant?" I had probable cause," Holt stammered. "He was a threat. He was an elderly man sitting in his living room," Quinn corrected. "You broke down his door in the dead of night. You were intoxicated. Your toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of 0.18. That is twice the legal limit. You weren't serving a warrant, Mr. Holt. You were hunting." "He had a gun!" Holt shouted, losing his composure. "He shot me!" "He shot you after you fired 3 rounds into his living room," Quinn said, projecting a photo of the bullet-riddled sofa on the screen. "He shot you in the shoulder to neutralize the threat. He could have shot you in the head. He saved your life, didn't he?" Holt looked down at his lap. "I don't know." "You don't know." Quinn walked closer. "You are alive, Mr. Holt. That is how you know. My father, a man you called a vagrant, a criminal, and a thug, applied the tourniquet that kept you from bleeding out on his dining room floor. He showed you more mercy in 5 minutes than you showed this community in years." The jury was spellbound. The evidence was overwhelming. The dashcam footage of the broken tail light, the text messages from the Blue Shield chat log that the FBI had recovered, and the 911 call, where Holt could be heard screaming insults before the shooting started. But the final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected witness. The prosecution called Sergeant Riley Brooks to the stand. "Sergeant," the district attorney asked, "did Officer Holt ever express racially biased views in your presence?" Brooks took a deep breath. She looked at Holt, then at Harlan. She chose the side of history. "Yes," she said clearly. "Multiple times. He bragged about cleaning up the trash in the park. He referred to minority residents as invaders. I was too afraid to report him because his father was the former deputy mayor. But I'm not afraid anymore." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Holt's head snapped up, betrayal in his eyes. His shield was gone. The jury deliberated for only a short time. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood up. His hands didn't shake. "In the matter of the People versus Mason Holt, we find the defendant on count 1, attempted murder in the first degree, guilty." Count 2, aggravated assault guilty. Count 3, deprivation of civil rights guilty. Count 4, burglary with a deadly weapon guilty. Judge Harlan Shaw looked over his spectacles at Holt. Mr. Holt, you betrayed the public trust in the most vile manner possible. You used the badge as a shield for your own bigotry. You are sentenced to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Holt slumped forward, sobbing into his good arm. The bailiffs moved in. As they hauled him away, he looked back at the gallery. He locked eyes with Harlan. Harlan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded. A final solemn closing of the book. The bus ride to Ironwood State Correctional Facility was the longest of Mason Holt's life. Shackled hand and foot, chained to a metal bench alongside the very people he used to hunt, Holt stared out the wire mesh window at the passing world. He watched the trees blur by, realizing with a sickening lurch in his gut that he wouldn't see a tree without a fence in front of it for a very long time. He was processed in silence. The correctional officers didn't offer him the brotherhood nod he expected. To them, a dirty cop was worse than a criminal. He was a liability. He was stripped, searched, and issued a bright orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. Because of his former status, Holt was placed in administrative segregation, protective custody. But the inmates called it the hole. His cell was 6 by 8 feet. A concrete slab for a bed, a stainless steel toilet, a slit of a window that showed only a patch of gray sky. For a man who had thrived on the power of roaming the streets, the confinement was a special kind of psychological torture. At first, Holt held on to his rage. He paced the tiny cell like a caged wolf, muttering to himself. He blamed Harlan Vale. He blamed the chief. He blamed the woke jury. He replayed the moment in the living room 1,000 times, convincing himself that he was the victim, that he was the one who had been wronged. But prison has a way of grinding down even the hardest stones. The isolation began to rot him from the inside out. He spent nearly every hour of the day alone. The 1 hour of recreation was spent in a solitary chain-link dog run where he could smell the fresh air but couldn't touch the grass. From the general population yard, the taunts drifted over the fence like poison gas. "Yo, Officer 4922!" a voice would scream. Holt flinched every time they used his old badge number. "You comfortable in there? You want me to call a tow truck for your dignity? Hey, Holt, I got some birdseed for you. Come get it, boy." He was the most hated man in Ironwood. The white gangs rejected him because he was damaged goods and a traitor to the badge. The black and Latino gangs wanted his blood. He was an island in an ocean of sharks. Then came the day the protection failed. As time wore on in his sentence, Holt was being escorted to the infirmary for a routine checkup on his gunshot wound. The bullet from Harlan's gun had left him with a permanent ache, a throbbing reminder of the night he lost everything. The escort was a new guard, Officer Cole. Cole was young, bored, and, unbeknownst to Holt, heavily in debt to a gang leader in C Block. As they walked down the long linoleum-lined corridor, connecting the housing unit to the medical wing, Cole stopped. "Hold up," Cole muttered, tapping his earpiece. "Radio check." He stepped around the corner, leaving Holt alone in the hallway. Holt frowned. "Hey, you can't leave me here," he said, his voice echoing off the cinder blocks. A heavy steel door at the end of the hall clicked. It hadn't been latched properly. Holt's heart hammered against his ribs. He heard the sound of boots. Not the heavy rhythmic tread of guards, but the scuffing, hurried sound of inmates in canvas shoes. 3 men stepped into the hallway. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. In prison, reputation is everything, and taking down a dirty cop was a badge of honor. Holt recognized the leader, a massive man named Jamal Ellis, serving life for a robbery Holt's old partner had botched. "No," Holt whispered, backing up until his spine hit the cold wall. "Officer Cole, help!" There was no answer. The corridor was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the approaching footsteps. You like making people get on the ground, don't you, Mason? Jamal asked, his voice deceptively soft. You like standing over them, making them feel small. Holt tried to raise his hands, but the shackles limited his movement. Stay back. I'll scream. Scream? Jamal smiled. It's soundproof. The beating was not chaotic. It was surgical. They didn't use shivs. They didn't want him dead. Death was too easy. They wanted to take away the one thing Holt valued most, his physical dominance. They knocked him down with a single punch. While he was on the ground gasping for air, Jamal grabbed Holt's ankles. You walk tall on our streets, Jamal grunted. Now you crawl. The stomp was precise. A heavy boot came down hard on the lower spine, right at the lumbar junction. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dry branch snapping in a winter storm. Holt didn't scream. The air simply left his body in a jagged wheeze. A bolt of white-hot lightning tore through his back, followed instantly by a terrifying cold numbness that rushed down his legs. When the guards finally arrived minutes later, the hallway was empty. Holt was lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling lights, tears streaming silently down his face. He tried to move his legs. He commanded them to move. They didn't answer. Later, winter had been harsh, but spring had exploded across Oak Haven with a vengeance. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine and wet earth. Chief Harlan Vale stood at a podium in the center of what used to be a vacant, trash-filled lot on the south side of the city, the poorest district, a place the police usually ignored unless they were looking for arrests. Today, the lot was transformed. A brand-new building stood there, gleaming with glass and brick. A playground filled with laughing children stretched out behind it. Harlan looked older, his hair now completely white, but he stood as straight as ever. Beside him stood Quinn, beaming, and Chief Nolan Pierce, who looked humbled and grateful. "Thank you all for coming," Harlan said into the microphone. The crowd, a mix of neighborhood residents, city officials, and police officers, went silent. Not long ago, darkness visited my home. A man tried to use fear to break this community. He thought the power came from a gun and a badge. He thought he could act with impunity because of who he was. Harlan paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. But justice is a funny thing. It doesn't just punish the wicked. It restores the balance. When we won the civil lawsuit against the city and the police union, my daughter asked me what I wanted to do with the money. It was a significant sum, millions of dollars, meant to pay for the pain and suffering caused by Officer Holt. Harlan turned and gestured to the building behind him. A heavy velvet curtain hung over the nameplate above the doors. I didn't want the money, Harlan said. I wanted to ensure that no child in this neighborhood ever grows up thinking the only way to have power is to bully someone else. I wanted to turn a legacy of hate into a foundation of love. He nodded to Quinn. She pulled the cord. The velvet curtain fell away. The crowd gasped, then murmured, and finally a ripple of applause started that grew into a roar. The sign above the door read, "The Mason Holt Center for Youth Development, dedicated to justice, equality, and community policing." We used his name, Harlan said, a small grim smile playing on his lips. We used every penny of his pension, his assets, and the settlement money to build this. Forevermore, the name Mason Holt will not be associated with racism or police brutality. It will be the place where children learn to read, learn to play, and learn to respect one another. We took his name, and we gave it to the people he hated. It was the ultimate victory. Harlan hadn't just defeated Holt. He had rewritten his history. Miles away, in the recreation yard of the Ironwood Medical Unit, a wheelchair sat in the shadow of the high wall. Mason Holt sat in the chair, a blanket draped over his useless legs. He looked 20 years older. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by depression and medication. He held a crumpled newspaper in his lap. It was a week old, The headline read, "New Youth Center Opens, a Victory for Civil Rights." He saw the photo, Harlan Vale cutting the ribbon. And above Harlan's head, his own name, Holt, carved in stone, welcoming a diverse crowd of smiling children. Holt's hand shook as he stared at the image. He wanted to rip it up. He wanted to scream, but he had no fight left. The irony crushed him heavier than any boot. He was funding the very future he had tried to suppress. A bird landed on the chain-link fence in front of him. A sparrow. Holt looked at the bird. He remembered the park. He remembered the handcuffs. He remembered the feeling of the wind on his face when he could still walk. "Go away," Holt whispered, his voice cracking. The bird chirped, tilted its head, and flew away, soaring over the razor wire, free and unburdened. Holt watched it go until it was just a speck in the vast blue sky. He gripped the wheels of his chair, turned himself around, and slowly, painfully rolled himself back toward his cage. Harlan Vale was right. The badge was a heavy burden, but nothing was heavier than the weight of your own sins. This is the kind of restorative justice that truly heals communities. Not only did Harlan survive, but he turned his attacker's name into a symbol of hope for the very community Holt despised. That is a level of strategic karma you rarely see. Holt lost his job, his freedom, his ability to walk, and finally even the legacy of his own name. It serves as a brutal reminder. When you dig a grave for someone else, you better dig too. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think the punishment fit the crime? Was using Holt's name for the youth center a stroke of genius or too much? Let me know down below if this story kept you on the edge of your seat. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We upload new stories of justice, karma, and survival every single week. Share this video with a friend who needs a win today. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and always trust your gut.